4th of December, and we are hurtling along towards the 2024 election year, and of course, Christmas and the holidays. And we are very fortunate to have with us tonight on the Captive Audience our semi regular expert that guides us through the ins and outs of not only national politics, but the media, polling, everything that kind of plays into the mechanics of politics, as well as stuff that we just don't all hear when we're operating out in the world. And there's this sort of this back channel that exists. You and I know it exists uh, uh, between campaigns and the media and all the things that are going on in the chattering classes behind the curtain. And so with us here is Dave Huguenel. Dave, welcome to the show tonight. And of course, Go Big Media is your firm, and you've been involved with the Trump 2020 War Room, and so you've seen a lot of that backstage.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I like that you call me the semi-regular expert, although I feel like the better title is regular semi-expert. I will try my best to sound smart tonight for you guys and your audience.
Regular semi-expert and LSU fan.
I think I know what I'm doing. Yeah. So Jaden Daniels, influencer. I think we're gonna win the Heisman. I'm excited about it. Sorry, Bo Nix. It's just not gonna happen.
No, he had one game and he could have sealed it. He would have, I think, if he had just romped the way Oregon had done. And they were favored, but nope, didn't happen.
Nope. So I'm just glad that I can say to all my Oregon friends that LSU and Oregon have won the exact same amount of conference championships this season.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but looked good doing it. For the most part. I mean, you got to get. But you know what? I know we'll get deep into college football here, but I really didn't think it was Alabama's year. I thought that was done. And
so I'll say this as an LSU fan, the college playoff decision was a win-win for me. So Florida State got absolutely robbed, which is fantastic. I support that 100%. I mean, everyone hates Alabama. So it's great. Like, it's a win-win for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Alabama does have quite a gauntlet to deal with here. Those are some strong teams. So
we'll see how it fares out.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I don't want to speak too soon because we know that how it's ended up in the past. But hey, here we are with an even bigger contest. We have the presidential race going on, the Republican primary, and an upcoming debate. I even heard that they're going to start allowing unsanctioned debates. There's a discussion in the RNC about that, but there is one more sanctioned debate that's going to happen, right?
I saw that, and it's insane to say, but this is true. The Iowa caucuses are next month.
Yeah.
So it's right around the corner. Obviously news today, the debate stage has been whittled down to 4 since last time. There's Tim Scott has bowed out. Burgum dropped out of the race today, I believe. At least today's the day that I saw it. So, you have 4 more people on that stage vying to be cabinet positions. I don't think they're going to be the nominee, but we'll see what happens.
And so there was this recent announcement that Nikki Haley was endorsed by the Koch brothers and their machinery. What do you think of that? What is that a factor of?
I mean, I think it's a factor of who is going to be best runner-up. Honestly, I mean, we can talk about all of the iterations of what's happening with Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Vivek, Christie. The reality is they're all fighting for second, third, or fourth place. Every single poll is showing that in the best of circumstances for any of those candidates, they're just miles and miles behind where Trump is in any polling, whether it's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, or a national poll. So just, if this was, we're talking about college football, we're starting, if this was the sports betting market, I mean, man, you got to take Trump with the points, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's just it. And to some extent. And I see we had a question there from Bobby about, well, she said, yeah, that maybe there's help from the Pac-12 refs. But that's going to be forever that they'll talk about that. But I think, yeah, if by some chance Trump doesn't get the nomination, who do you think will get it? Well, what circumstance could that be?
So I mean, I think the other way to ask that question is like, who has the best chance of coming in second place? And the reality is the Ron DeSantis campaign has completely flamed out at this point. Any momentum that they had going into the Iowa caucuses just really seems to be gone. One of the things that, for me, I work on campaigns for a living. I've been a campaign manager. I've been staff on campaigns. You work on enough campaigns, and I don't even necessarily need to see a poll. I can just kind of read the room and tell if I'm working on a winning campaign or a losing campaign.
Yeah.
And if you read the room with the DeSantis campaign, none of it looks good. Their super PAC, Never Back Down, just fired 3 of their top employees, and their chairman, Adam Laxalt, the former attorney general in Nevada, resigned from the PAC. A winning organization does not see that type of turnaround in their staff. And by the way, this isn't the first time the DeSantis team has had to lay off people or fire people. They had major layoffs earlier this year on the hard side of the actual campaign itself. None of those things. If I was an alien coming in from outer space and I hadn't seen a single poll, and you showed me just that, that's enough for me to say that campaign is failing. So by the logic of the fact that DeSantis is failing, that leaves the next person, which is Nikki Haley, to potentially be that best runner up and take second place. So that's kind of how this race looks to me. The other thing too, again, if I'm kind of just getting away from the numbers and the statistics and the polling and all the hard facts, and just kind of going off of gut, most campaigns, successful campaigns do something, especially when you have to make up that much ground. They do something that kind of makes you turn your head and go, whoa, that's pretty cool. Right. And as a campaign guy, whether it's a cool ad or it's a cool message or some sort of strategy, I'm like, wow, I wish I thought of that. I wish most winning campaigns usually have some sort of moment where I'm like, wow, that was really smart. That was really clever. I haven't seen anything like that from DeSantis, from Haley, from Christie, from the only thing I can say about Vivek that was like kind of cool and clever was him rapping to Eminem in Iowa. That's about the only thing out of that campaign that's been strategically, that's made sense. So, or been cool, at least I should say. I don't know if it made sense, but so that's, at the end of the day, it's just why I say sarcastically, but somewhat seriously, everyone that's on that stage in Tuscaloosa is going to be, they're not debating to be the presidential nominee. They're debating to either, expand their book tour so they can make a lot of money after this. They're debating so they can maybe get a good cabinet position, or maybe they're debating to be a VP pick once Trump gets the nomination. They're not debating to be president at this point.
No, and I think the issue too, isn't it, is that they're drawing attention and they're debating with one another, but they're not really that focused on Biden. And so not only are they behind in the polls by 40%, but they're not talking about the main thing, that if you were really a strong nominee potential, you would be focused on who the Democrat nominee is supposed to be technically.
Right.
Technically.
Right. Well, and that's and actually Bobby put a good question about there in the chat about DeSantis still being governor of Florida. Bobby, you're correct. There used to be a law in Florida that made it to where if you ran for president, you had to step down as governor. But guess what? The Florida legislature revoked that law from the request of the DeSantis team. So that law is no longer in effect. I think it was this past year. It was either last year or this year that they got rid of that law before he announced his presidency, or a presidential campaign, I should say.
They did, and I think it was out of self-interest, wasn't it? Because
100%.
Yeah, no, I mean the legislature didn't want to deal with somebody not, a different governor, at that point in time. You know,
No. To be clear, that was DeSantis and his team wanting to stay governor while he ran for president. That
no, but
they were
to
lobbying.
get the legislature to cooperate with it was why. Why did they do that? Because it's, you know, and I figured it's probably because stability. A lot of them want to control the timing of when things happen,
right?
Whatever they happen, yeah,
right. So, but yeah, it's self-interest from a politician. Not shocked.
No. That is not news. But you did mention about Doug Burgum dropping out. So it is Vivek, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and
Chris Christie.
Which I don't know why Chris Christie is still in. Has he ever polled out of the single
digits? The RNC rules, it has a donor requirement in terms of individual donors, not total amount raised. And everyone that's on that stage has met that threshold. The other one with polling, it doesn't have to be just national or just Iowa. It is, I think you have to get at least 6% in one RNC sanction poll, a national poll, or a poll in a early state, which is basically Iowa, New Hampshire, or South Carolina. So Christie is, again, I say polling well, relatively. I'm grading on a low curve here compared to his competitors for best runner-up. He's polling better in New Hampshire than he is anywhere else, and that's what's getting him qualified to get on the debate stage.
So it's New Hampshire, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is a state that he's demonstrated some strength in the past. Although did he lose to Trump in 2016 in New Hampshire? Because that's when he dropped out, didn't he?
He did. He dropped out the night after New Hampshire and endorsed Trump the same day.
Yeah.
So I think he's Christie seems to be running the same playbook that he ran in 2016, which, how that goes for him, I think it's going to probably have the same result. Again, even in New Hampshire, where Christie is, doing the best, or he's the strongest, he's still miles behind where Trump is in the in-state polling. That's also a primary and not a caucus. So you're going to have, primary voters going out to vote, as opposed to this sort of more insular, sort of grassroots, like PCPs and that sort of stuff going to caucus. So, that is beneficial to someone like President Trump. He is going to, most candidates like that are going to perform better in a primary than will a caucus. So I think what Christie does after New Hampshire is going to be interesting. The only thing I know that he's not going to be after New Hampshire is a presidential candidate.
Yeah, I think that's when the jig is up, right?
Right.
And he's been mostly he's spent his time on the stage. Every once in a while, he says something to one of the other candidates, but for the most part, he isn't even focused on Biden. He's just focused on Trump, which I don't see how, if you're like dozens and dozens of points behind in a race, and you need to attract people who are supporting the lead candidate in the race in order to exceed at least the support that the other candidates in the primary are getting. How do you do that? By attacking the candidate who's getting the most support?
I would say the Christie message in this primary is interesting, a little bit different. I mean, his thesis is the reason I'm running is no one else is running a good campaign, and now he's out running a bad campaign. So I'm not sure if I understand the logic of it, but it's different. It's different. What is what's the quote from the movie Dodgeball? That's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. How do I get from Christie?
Yeah, and I did see the story that they're considering. It was a CNN story, which immediately made me suspicious that it's not true. But I think I saw it reported in enough places. I'm sorry, but I have trust issues with CNN, because sometimes they really are. They are fake news in so much of the time that I have to find. I have to do my own corroboration or secondary confirmation that the story is true before I'm even willing to tell somebody that it's true. But it was the Washington Post that first said the proposal was being considered, and so okay, maybe that's a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I guess, do you think that's going to continue? Because Trump's been calling for the end of the debates.
I mean, I think that once we get past Iowa, things are going to change dramatically. Again, whether you're the Haley campaign or the DeSantis campaign, Vivek and Christie are not even worth talking about. I mean, they're just, in terms of who could even in theory get the nomination besides Trump at this point. But if you're focusing on DeSantis and Nikki Haley, they have to do something to change the dynamic of this race. And frankly, you saw DeSantis try to do that with that debate last week on Sean Hannity with California's Governor Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, I wonder what she thought of that.
And I mean, I honestly think that DeSantis just got absolutely bodied in that debate. I mean, Newsom's closing line to his opener that we have two things, we each have we have one thing in common: neither of us will be our party's presidential nominee in 2024. That was a brutal way to open that debate. There was some good interaction in terms of philosophy and differences, and like there's plenty of problems in California that anybody with two eyes and two ears can point out. So DeSantis obviously did that and did that with success, but it ended up not doing anything to ignite anything around his campaign and show that this is why he needs to be the nominee. I just don't think that, Newsom came prepared enough with enough of those kind of got you one-liners that, from a media perspective, I don't think DeSantis got anything out of it.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a wet blanket. That's the problem, is that it was a pay-per-view. It's like two wrestlers not competing for the title in pro wrestling, and you actually know that it does, just like most pro wrestling matches, it doesn't matter who won.
Right.
That was the way I felt about it, which meant, okay, I missed a pro wrestling match.
Yeah, no, and look, I think that's a really fair analogy. And I don't know if I've seen the post ratings of it. I'm sure people watched it. I'm sure a lot of folks didn't. Again, it's just you can see the DeSantis and the Haley campaign sort of grasping for those kind of moments to change the dynamic of what this presidential primary is going to be, and none of them can, because the reality is President Trump has a really good grasp on what this country is upset about. He also has the clearest contrast to Biden, having been the president prior to him, having the best economy in my lifetime under the Trump administration. It's a very easy argument for Trump to say, do you miss me yet? Right? When inflation is at all-time highs, when people are really starting to feel the crunch of inflation, when when it's just tougher for families to get what they need, when you have this absolutely lawless border that is setting records in terms of illegal migrants pouring over, we have a fentanyl crisis that's completely flared up, homeless crisis that's completely flared up. All of these things weren't the issues they were when President Trump, first got into office and during his term. So for him to say, look, I don't have to tell you what I'm going to do. You need to look at what I did. It's a very easy contrast for any voter to understand. And I think that's part of the reason that he's being so successful in this primary.
Well, and I also think that people believe when he says he's going to do something that he's going to do it. He already had that credibility,
right.
Which if that were a weakness instead of a strength, then there might be an inroad for others to come in and say, well, I stand for this. Even people who couldn't prove they would do it would just cast doubt on whether he would. And that's really tough to do with him, because
sure,
he said and did things that people didn't really think, well, I don't know if he'll do it. It's a nice campaign promise, but building a wall, I don't know if he'll do it. It's a good talking point. And then he did it. He did it even when he got zero cooperation from Congress to do it. And yet he found a way to do it anyway. And it's that I think has gotten a lot of people to believe that he would actually execute on the results.
Right. Well, and I think, again, as the campaign nuts and bolts, that's always where my head goes, and just turn how these campaigns operating. The Trump campaign just seems to be doing all the right things. They're staying on message, in terms of, what issues they're talking about, what issues they're reaching out to voters to engage voters on, and they're just running a smart campaign. They just whereas again the DeSantis campaign really seems to be flailing. They're changing their messages. One day they're attacking President Trump, the next day they're attacking Nikki Haley. I mean, that's another thing too. When it comes to producing these television ads that we see articles and news about, we see these direct mail pieces that go out. Those are very expensive to put together, especially for a presidential campaign. You're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars sometimes that's devoted to these messages. So for the DeSantis campaign to have to pivot from going after President Trump to Nikki Haley, that represents hundreds of thousands of dollars, a lot of resources reinvested just to make sure he can stay in second place. Like, that's why he's attacking Nikki Haley. It's not so he can become the nominee, so he can stay in second place, because Nikki Haley is gaining that much ground on him. In some places, she's actually leading him, I believe. So again, there's nothing in this presidential primary right now that tells me that we're going to have any other result besides President Trump being our nominee by the time we get to the national convention.
So here's kind of a tough question. My regular co-host on the show here asked me if I could, because we talked about it last week. He and I did. David Darnell. Mm-hmm. He said, "How does the Trump, or how do you perceive the Trump campaign intends to win the general election in light of the 2020 results, given that you've got to actually have people that voted for Biden either not vote or vote for Trump in order to kind of switch that outcome?" And it's obviously going to be in some targeted states. And then I know the other thing, sort of, because David and I talked about this last week, that's lurking in the background is, aren't they going to just kind of mess with the voting system, the ballots, to make sure that they got, vote by mail where it works for them, and they're going to have their what do they call them, ballot harvesters, and they're going to come loaded for bear, even if they have, because let's just stipulate they suck on the issues, right? The Biden administration has stayed on message, the wrong one, and it's getting worse, right? They've successfully done that. I don't think anything they've tried, including the Bidenomics labels, works. So let's say they're failing on that. But we have to produce a different outcome than 2020, and we have to do it in enough of these states that matter to change the outcome of the 2020 election. And we have to overcome probably the margin of fraud. At least that's what we call it in Oregon, even if somebody says it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot to kind of unpack there in terms of how does Trump win in the general election? I mean, in getting folks that voted for Biden to vote for Trump. I mean, it is. I mean, the first way to talk about that is, again, just look at the economy, look at the changes under the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration. I think it's fair to say that there are at least a handful of people out there, I'm being a little facetious when I say a handful, that are remorseful over their vote for Biden and are willing to potentially change their mind. There's national polling that points that out right now, right? Where, Trump is leading in national polls. He's leading in polls in battleground states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, some of these places that we lost in 2020. So there's empirical proof that buyer's remorse in terms of Biden versus Trump exists. And again, I think I pointed this out on your last show. One of the things that's really important to remember is that at this point in 2019, Trump was not leading in any national polls with Biden. He was losing these national polls. It was neck and neck. In some places, we were losing in polling in battleground states at this point. So we're in a much different environment than we were 4 years ago on that. The other big elephant that's no longer in the room is we're not in the midst of a pandemic that had people on edge. Now, that affects both the messaging of the campaign. It also affects some of the election stuff that you talked about, because a lot of the things that went into effect that gave Democrats an advantage in states like Pennsylvania and Georgia are no longer in effect. So in Pennsylvania, some of the COVID, changes they made to vote by mail and things like that because of COVID mostly, were actually overturned by the Supreme Court in 2021. So those rules are no longer in effect. Governor Kemp has passed new rules in Georgia that really protect the integrity of the elections, making sure that everyone gets to vote, but he only gets to vote once. All those different rules have come into effect. So I think the legal infrastructure around how our elections will be handled is different than 4 years ago. And I think the overall climate, because of a lack of a once in a generation pandemic, and we're facing all of these monumental issues, whether it's a lawless border, a bad economy, rising crime, rising homelessness, all those things that used to be West Coast problems that are now countrywide problems. I just think it just all points to a much different election. This isn't a rematch on the 2020 turf. This is a new stadium that we're playing in.
So I think that all makes sense. There's a lot of folks. I encounter this constantly. And I'm not just talking about the national election. And when people say, why should I donate, or why should I, raise my hopes that we can win elections? So this goes for like congressional and even state and local elections. They just become convinced that the election system itself is just simply not going to allow for a result that would be favorable to Republicans. That it's and I, without going deep into every potential thing that people think, what do you think are the best things to tell folks? Because I kind of have my little talking points specific to Oregon. I'll give you just one. In 2022, 25% of Republicans didn't vote, so 1/4. And so, however strongly we really felt, if only 5% more had voted, then actually we would have won a governor's race. We probably would have won 5 to 6 state legislative races. We would have won a congressional seat in the 6th district. We would have comfortably won the 5th district race, and the 4th might have even been closer than it was.
Well, and I think this is kind of the psychological misnomer that happens with campaigns with wins and losses, right? Because campaign, in elections, they're always binary. You either win or you lose. History rarely remembers if it was a close loss or a close win, right? So and talking about Oregon specifically, I've said this for years. Democrat control in Oregon is a mile wide, but it's only an inch deep. That's why last year you saw, you had a historic win in Oregon 5 with Lori Chavez Dreamer, first congressional flip in Oregon for Republicans since 1994. I don't even know if they had CD players in '94. I think we're still listening to cassettes. Maybe CDs had just come out. No, I guess because you get like the 1,000 hours of free AOL last time the Republicans flipped a seat out there. Yeah. So that's a huge, huge win. They picked up legislative seats in Oregon. They picked up state Senate seats. So you had some successes. And the reality is if you look at the amount of votes necessary, like if you look at just like the Oregon legislature, the lower chamber, the state house, if you look at the closest losses and how much each candidate lost by in the 5 districts that you needed to get a tied legislature, so a dual speakership. Republicans have the exact same amount of legislators as Democrats. Right. You're talking about, I believe it's less than 4,000 votes total if you add those 5 closest losses up.
Yeah, I've been quoting 4,300. Yeah.
So call it 4,300, right? 4,300 people now, and even then, you could just say, I mean, if you have one person voting Republican instead of Democrat, you could do the math and say that you actually just need half of that. If you can get half of those people to switch their votes, you win those elections. So you're talking like between 2,000 flips or 4,300 new votes, and Republicans have dual speakership. That is a really, I mean, if you had 4,300 people show up to who's your silly basketball team in Portland? Trailblazers?
Trailblazers, yeah.
If you had 4,300 people show up to that game, you'd be talking about how paltry the attendance was. I mean, this is a small amount of people. right? I mean, there's high schools that have more than 4,300 students in it. It's a, wrap your head around that number, 4,300 people, and you can change the entire direction of your state in one of your legislative chambers, right? Same thing if you zoom out and look nationally and looking at the 2020 election results, right? President Trump lost Georgia by I think about 11,000 votes, lost Pennsylvania by I believe about 1%, maybe less. Similar result in Arizona, Wisconsin, I think Michigan was a little bit wider, but still these weren't blowout losses. In 2020, these were close losses. 11,000 people in Georgia, in an entire state that has millions upon millions of people. Again, mile wide, because the end of the day, you look at the Electoral College number, it looks like a blowout. The reality is Biden's in the White House and not Trump. So we feel like it's a blowout. We feel because it's binary. But if you really peel back the layers of the onion, you realize that we're really, really close to making big changes in this country, and Republicans winning, even in places like Oregon. We just have we're struggling at that extra 1 or 2% that we need.
Yeah, and hopefully, we have a machine that steps up, because I think we know the Democrats have a machine. They drag terrible candidates across the line in districts they should lose all the time. Right. And sometimes we do too. I think in California, I'm not saying they were terrible candidates, but we had candidates that needed that ballot harvesting extra oomph to flip those congressional seats in California. Do you think that there's enough seriousness with the RNC and many of the targeted states to get this job done, and where it's legal to ballot harvest?
So I think that there are, and there always have been, people that understand the importance of, playing the game by the rules that are set, right? The reality is that, vote by mail, whether you're talking about Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, it's becoming a growing, and it's becoming something that more and more people are adopting is how they want to cast their ballot. Yeah. And it's obviously going to remain legal especially as it gets more popular. I mean, again, think of it from a legislator, or, if you're in a state house or a state senator, you want to do things that are popular. So if vote by mail is getting more popular, it's not going away. So sitting here and lamenting on whether or not vote by mail is the best way to have an election and all that, it's a great esoteric philosophical conversation to have. And I'm sure it'd be great for some sort of Lincoln Douglas debate, but that debate doesn't help you win elections. What helps you win elections is understanding the rules, and how you can devise a strategy within that rule set to be successful. So short answer is yes. I think there are a lot of people, the RNC, I know they launched their first sort of election integrity office as a committee last year. And that's expanded. I mean, there's a lot of different, a lot of the committees nationally are looking at more strategies on how they can engage with states when it comes to things like vote by mail. And also, like, this, I know this isn't a thing in Oregon, but a lot of states have early voting, like my home state of Louisiana. You have in-person early voting on top of vote by mail. Using all of that to your advantage within the rules is extremely important. Again, we started with college football. It would be like, playing a game, but like, not playing by the rules, and you're kind of disadvantaging yourself by doing that.
Yeah, no, that's right. Bank the Vote is also that program which is meant to change Republican attitudes towards whether they should hold on to their ballots or hold or wait to vote versus getting in there early. And I think that'll start to change people's attitudes, because the attitude just in 2022 was actually the opposite in many states. And yeah, we lost some things we should have won probably.
Right. And the reality is, when it comes to any election, right, there's always a possibility that if you're casting your ballot, whether it's at a polling location or it's via mail, that a mistake can be made, right? Gets lost in the mail, the machine breaks, all those sorts of things happen. What's important for a voter to know, and then for state parties and political organizations to know, are the rules to rectify those mistakes and identify them and fix them as fast as possible, so no one's disenfranchised. I think that's part of it too, is there's an education piece to this in terms of, yes, if your ballot isn't cast correctly, what are the things that you can do to rectify that legally? And I think that that's something that, I personally definitely want to see more of, are our institutions helping create that awareness on how people can protect their vote.
So, on the one hand, we've got a very likely nominee, President Trump, and we've got Joe Biden. And I was just kind of glancing here, the top three issues he's completely upside down on, the ones that the recent polls said, and this is nationwide, it varies locally, but inflation was number one. It was like half of voters said that was their biggest concern, which is synonymous now with the economy and what concerns people, right? The second one was the border and what's happening there. And the third one was crime and violence, which I know is kind of a catch-all bucket. But those were not in too distant. It was like half was inflation, 35% was border illegal immigration, 27% crime and violence. And we know wrapped into the crime and violence is what's been going on with homelessness and addiction in many places those things have converged, those issues, right? So he's upside down on the issues. Bill Maher the other day said that Biden's going to lose. And he said it straight to Donna Brazil's face on his show and questioned why anybody would even consider supporting this guy. And of course, the Biden bots that go out, and they just say what they're supposed to say, even though, they don't believe any of it. And then you see the most recent headlines, which is that Biden's they literally have proof that he was given payments by his son and his brother. That's today. It's like so he's almost on the edge of where he could be convicted on straight up in a court for the crime of accepting, bribes from the Chinese Communist Party, which is just so. What is the chance they're even going to keep this guy if they are almost certain to lose?
Well, I think the chances of Biden being the nominee, barring some sort of unforeseen health thing, obviously, like, that's the biggest question. But as long as his health stays where it's at now, he's going to be the nominee. And there's plenty. Despite all that, one, it is extremely rare in American politics for you to see, unless he were to proactively step down, to see the Democratic apparatus try to make him not be the nominee. The other thing, you're also seeing institutional things within the party to protect him so he can stay the nominee, right? They're doing things to make sure that he clinches the nomination by adjusting the way that delegates are allocated and how delegates are selected, which is kind of this usually kind of untold story in terms of presidential politics. But there's a lot of movement behind the scenes every 4 years with both Republican and Democrat presidential campaigns to kind of game what the delegate allocation, so how many folks you get to vote for you at the national convention are, where you actually truly become the nominee. And then on top of that, who those actual people sitting in the seats are too, because that can also matter.
The delegates, right?
As we saw in 2016, where on the Republican side we had a bit of a raucous with states like Virginia and Colorado and that sort of stuff. So Democrats nationwide are doing things to make it to where it's basically mathematically impossible for anyone but Biden to get the delegates necessary to win at the convention. And then on top of that, they have good control over who those people are. So they can't really get, they know that they have people that are not going to go off the reservation. They're going to support Biden, all that sort of stuff. So he's going to be the nominee unless there's some unforeseen health thing that happens. And that's obviously always a possibility, but I'd still put the possibility of being kind of fairly low.
It's just interesting that the Democrats, who know they have a lot at stake, and frankly, if they were to end up in a situation where they didn't control either the Senate or the House or the presidency, we would run the table on them. I mean, all this stuff that they've been doing and getting away with, there will be laws against this going forward, and there will be investigations that would expose everything they did, and there will be FBI and DOJ people conducting real investigations of what they did. The media will still be there, but don't they have too much at stake to go down with the Biden ship?
I mean, I think that the media will always carry water for Biden or any.
Mhm.
I mean, it could be it could be a russet potato that's the Democratic nominee. Media will carry water for it. That's just what they do.
Look healthier than Biden at this point.
I
A
mean,
russet potato.
possibly, yeah, like one of those like Yukon Golds. Like that would be a great nominee for them. No, I think
insult to potatoes though.
Yeah. So you didn't expect me to show up with like potato knowledge. I can name like 5 different breeds of potato or species of potato breeds. I don't know how to. I'm a potato expert, and then I do political punditry on the side. But no, look, I think that again, there are mechanisms to where yes, like later in the election, even when he's the nominee, to replace him and things like that. But I mean, we're talking, again, I'm going to stick with my football analogies. We're talking about like a flea flicker Statue of Liberty play once in a blue moon. And as someone that just kind of bets on, I think of things in terms of probabilities. The probability of that happening is so low that it doesn't make sense, if you're a candidate or a campaign or a national party or a state party to strategize around that.
Yeah, no, you can't strategize around it. It's increasingly, it's getting harder for me to believe that they would just sit there and say, this is our guy. And then they, more videos of him stumbling and falling or jabbering. But I know they knew this back in 2020 rather, but there were so many people they got to go and say anybody but Trump. And that was what they were able to do to kind of make it so that Biden wasn't really examined.
Well, I mean, look, I'll pretend to know a lot of things. I'll never pretend to understand why Democrats think what they think, regardless. Even when it comes to who they nominate for president. So,
yeah, no, good point. Well, just shifting gears here because there's been some interesting news in the just recent days here. We've got some congressional races and some very good opportunities. You're involved with one. I'm involved with another here in Oregon. And there are mistakes that the Democrats, I don't know if they see them as mistakes, but a couple Democrats here voted for having basically to take public parks, national parks, and public lands and allow federal funds to be used to take the millions of migrants that are streaming across the border and house them there.
Well, and I think it also applies to like homeless people too, right? To potentially put them there as well.
Potentially, yep.
Yeah. It's I don't know if it's exactly what Teddy Roosevelt had in mind when he created the National Park Service. But on that note, I mean, I saw the NRCC put out, a really clever ad. It's actually, not to get too in the weeds of it, but it's an AI generated ad, so they used AI technology to create these images of all these different national parks around the country with, encampments in them for migrants and homeless people and things of that nature. And they did it almost as like this sort of like tongue in cheek sort of national parks promo for Democrats. Thought it was extremely clever. It's probably one of the better uses of AI in a political video I've seen this year. In terms of it was just really well done. But it does point. It was a pretty bizarre vote for both Val Hoyle and Salinas to take. Look, as a former Oregonian, or I should say a recovering Oregonian, the reality is I don't know if there's few states in the country, save maybe Montana and Wyoming and some of the other places out there, that understand the value of these national parks for their beauty, the pristineness of them. It's a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. So for them to say that, yeah, listen, like we're okay with, creating these federal funds being used to create these giant encampments. not sure if I understand the vote. I mean, there are Democrats that voted against it, or I guess, yeah, voted with Republicans, I should say.
There's
Um,
six. Yeah, there were six, and you could tell they were border state people or places that have been impacted by the flood of migrants into the
right.
cities.
It's just, and also, I mean, the reality is that if you're okay with doing that as a Democrat, I mean, you're kind of just putting newspaper over spilled milk, right? I mean, you're not solving the actual problem. Why? You have so many for Democrats to be okay with our border being so porous, and frankly, it's one of the most, if not the most porous borders in the world. Um, you know, and again, I don't want to necessarily just focus on the migrant and the illegal immigrant part of it. I mean, that's obviously a huge part of it, but the reality is that open border, is one of the biggest reasons that we have the fentanyl crisis that we have in this country right now.
Yeah, that's right. So they're
It's
going
one
to
of
allow fentanyl in the national parks because that comes with it.
It's one of the reasons that human trafficking has gone up. There are so many problems besides people trying to cross the border illegally that have devastating consequences on not just border communities but communities across the country. I was doing some research for a race today, and my part of the country here in the southeast, and saw that Charlotte, North Carolina, ranks in the top 5 cities in the country, for human trafficking. And that's because it's part of the interstate connections that get into that gets down to I-10, that gets down to Mexico. It's a huge problem, and for Democrats to be okay with, well, we can let them stay at the national parks. It just seems like a really callous solution to a problem that is ruining this country.
Yeah, and on top of that, I actually know of examples where local governments, like city of Beaverton, considered this, the Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec District, which are all very local. They said, I think we might put a bunch of the homeless folks, the encampments. We're just going to put them in the parks because we control them when we think that'd be a better place for them. And the backlash that they got at the local level, in an area where it's hard for Republicans to actually win any elections now, was massive. Like you could see smoke coming up from their heads, the people that came up with the idea, because they got scorched. And that was locally. Just think of what that must be like in, say, a contested swing district like the 6th congressional district or the 4th congressional district. People love their parks out here, and they don't want to think that they're just being handed over to a problem being caused by the people that just voted to say that was fine.
It reminds me, Huey Long had a really famous sort of idiom when it came to taxes in Louisiana. And the idiom goes something along the lines of, don't tax him, don't tax me, tax the man behind the tree. Right. Where, you're going to tax somebody out the wazoo, but you're going to do it in a way that voters can't see it. Honestly, like, this kind of, reminds me of that. It's, don't send them here, don't send them there, send them out in the middle of nowhere. Like, that's what Democrats' solution is to our border is, let's put these migrants somewhere where, voters aren't going to see them, right? In the middle of a park, something like that. It just rings as really, really shallow policymaking when we really need real solutions.
That is very true. And I think, and of course, one of the candidates I know specifically in CD4, in CD4, Monique Despain actually spoke out on this and put out a press release on it. It's pretty obvious that this is just straight up like an unforced error that the Democrats are making politically. What was the urgency to go and oppose a bill like this? Does anybody really think that's good I mean, just putting on your campaign hat, what do the people that are running their campaigns say? Oh, this is a great idea.
Well, again, you're thinking of it as an unforced error, like from the perspective of logic and reason and good policy, right? If you're a Democrat like Val Hoyle and Salinas, I mean, you're catering to one of the most radical far left parties in certainly in our generation, but probably in our country's history, in terms of just some of the policies that the base of the Democratic voter, Democratic Party want. They want, to say that they want radical, socialist change in this country is not hyperbolic anymore. It might have been hyperbolic in the 90s or the 80s. That's a fair argument. It's not that anymore. The reality is that a large portion of the Democratic Party wants a lawless border. They want people to be more dependent on the government. They want government to control more money and control more funding, and thus control more people. That's just what Democrats want at this point. So the reality is that Val Hoyle and Andrea Salinas, I mean, they're carrying water for people that want to make what I would consider, and I would assume some of the folks listening tonight would agree, some pretty bad changes to this country.
That's true. I guess they're just true believers, and they know that their base of supporters that they're trying to raise money from right now must agree with the vote that they took. It just sounds like a really bad decision for somebody who's likely to face consequences. Hopefully, face consequences for that later.
Right. But yeah, now I want to just say too, I mean, the NRCC ad that went out, I thought was spot on. I think you linked to it earlier, in the chat. Definitely recommend everyone goes and takes a look at it. Not only is it a good example of a good, easy to digest message, but they did it in a pretty creative way that I was a fan of.
This is some AI that Republicans can feel totally comfortable with. It's simulating the future Democrats want for our country based on what they actually cast votes as. I think this is totally within bounds, and I'm so glad they did it. So, any other stories or last thoughts that you think you might want to bring to our attention? Because I haven't. We talked about polling and all that, but is there anything that's kind of lurking below the surface that people just don't know?
Man, I'll be honest. I've been so engrossed in college football the last couple of weeks that I don't have politics in the brain. So if I have a moment to close, I'll just say that I look forward to Jaden Daniels, LSU's quarterback, winning the Heisman Trophy. I look forward to Bo Nix coming in second place in that contest. Sorry that you guys didn't win the last Pac-12 championship.
Yeah, the last one. It's kind of weird to think of it that way, but it is the last one, and they had a chance. They really did, but
I can't tell if Bobby is yelling boo or if he's yelling bo. Really, I'm gonna say bo. I'm gonna pretend that's not a boo.
Yeah, that's a great question, because as soon as you put more O's in it, there's no way to know. But, it might be a number of weeks before we get to reconnect. What do you think about the 4 that are in? Who's gonna win? Who's gonna be our finalists and then championship in college football here?
Man, I mean, look, if you're just going off the history of it, the reality is, I mean, SEC always has a strong possibility to win this thing. I think it would win something like 14 out of the last 20 national championships have been SEC teams. I mean.
And the other ones were Ohio State and who else? Ohio State, Florida State, and Clemson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, it's this is probably the weakest Alabama team that's gone into the playoffs in recent memory, but the weakest Alabama team is still a pretty tough team. So I'm going to go ahead and again, I'm not a Roll Tide guy at all. Hate Alabama, but I'll let my SEC, kind of pride come out a little bit. I'm going to say Alabama surprises, shocks the world, becomes a college football champion this year.
And who do they play in the final?
Ooh,
obviously they had to get there. They had to be
because I guess they would play
Texas and Washington. In the other game, I think
I'm going to say Texas. I just don't have a lot of respect for the West Coast teams. Y'all always choke. You choke. So Texas, Alabama national championship. Alabama's the winner.
And that's a regular season rematch where Alabama lost to Texas, right? So that'll
the story writes itself.
Yeah. Oh, that does. Well, I'm gonna just agree with you because I just don't think Michigan can beat Alabama. But hey, uh, I'm just gonna say I kind of wish that UW would actually do something because then that make some people out here on the West Coast feel good.
I don't know that's going to happen. Maybe once y'all go to a real conference next year, we're going to have a shot. But you got to play some real teams first. You can't play Colorado and be like, oh my goodness, like we won that. It's such a big deal. Like I'm sorry, like you gotta play some big, some real teams for me to take you seriously.
Well, on that note,
now I hope I'm getting.
No, that's. I think you've got a point there, and so the Pac-12's not going to exist, and all those teams are going to have to put up or shut up now, and some of them will. We'll see. Hey, Dave, thanks again for joining us. A lot of folks are expressing their appreciation in the feed here, and keep fighting the good fight. I know that you are, and I know that you'll give us updates in the future because the only thing we know is we're not going to be able to predict exactly what crazy stuff does happen.
That is correct. That's why I never predict. I only project.
That's good. I like that. I might steal that from you, but I'll give you credit for it. So,
there you go.
Well, thanks. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching us. And please share the show with everyone you can. We'll see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience tomorrow night. It'll be Dave and I talking about whatever has happened in the news that day. Thanks everyone and have a great night.